Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story, backstory. 10 years ago, my Aunt Lisa passed away when I was just starting high school, leaving my two cousins, Jack and Emma, both in their mid-20s, to fend for themselves. My grandparents, who were quite well off, had a clause in their will stating that grandkids would receive half of their inheritance if a parent passed before the children reached 30, and then the other half when my grandparents eventually passed. Both Jack and Emma received a substantial inheritance coupled with the money they got from selling Aunt Lisa's house. Emma, the younger of the two, used her money wisely. She paid off her student loans and bought a nice piece of property where she still lives today. Jack, on the other hand, squandered his entire fortune. Like something straight out of a cautionary tale, within 3 years he was back to living in a small apartment, scraping by on his police officer salary. Everyone in our tight-knit family knew he had a substance abuse problem, so he was barely making ends meet while spending a fortune on drugs. Over the next couple of years, Jack went to rehab 3 times, all paid for by my grandparents. He finally sobered up after his girlfriend, now wife, Melissa, got pregnant. Melissa is an absolute piece of work. She saw my grandparents as her ticket to an easy life and essentially trapped Jack with a baby. Within 5 years, they had 3 kids, cementing her place in the family. Melissa, a nurse by profession, always seemed to need financial help with their growing family. Guess who they'd always turn to? You got it, my grandparents. Being the kind souls they were, my grandparents always lent a hand. My parents, my sister Sarah, and I quickly grew tired of their constant demands. My grandmother unfortunately passed away when I was 17, leaving Grandpa Tom as the last remaining grandparent. I was undoubtedly his favorite among the grandkids, which left a bitter taste in Jack and Melissa's mouths. With 2 more years of high school ahead of me, I moved in with Grandpa Tom to keep him company and help take care of him. Jack and Melissa absolutely despised this arrangement. Whenever they visited and I wasn't home, they'd send their 3 little terrors into my room to wreak havoc. My room had double doors, so it couldn't be locked. This was just the beginning. The longer I lived there, the more they messed with me. One day I came home to find Jack waiting for me. He cornered me in the kitchen, his face red with anger. "Listen here, you little punk," he growled. "You think you can just waltz in here and play favorite grandson? This isn't your house." I stood my ground. "Grandpa Tom asked me to stay here. I'm just helping out." Jack scoffed. "Yeah, right. You're just trying to weasel your way into more inheritance." "Well, it won't work." Things escalated from there. Jack even went as far as to place one of those little mechanical noisemakers in my room's cabinet. You know, the ones that play sounds at random intervals to drive you crazy. Thankfully, my German Shepherd, Max, always heard it, and after about a week, he finally found it. They did all this to distance me and deter me from taking care of Grandpa Tom so they could swoop in and be the heroes. This continued until one of their kids found my gun. By this time, I was 18 and in possession of a firearm. I use quotation marks because while the guns technically belonged to my grandfather, he couldn't aim or shoot them anymore due to arthritis and nerve degeneration. When I moved in, he entrusted all the weapons to me for self-defense if needed. But if he ever saw them out for any reason other than cleaning, there'd be hell to pay. Being well-trained with guns and taking pride in defending our home, I took this responsibility very seriously. I always kept a handgun in a locked container in my nightstand with the key on a high shelf out of reach from the kids. One fateful day, I was out getting food for Grandpa Tom when I came home to find Jack, Melissa, and my grandfather all staring at a gun on the table. It was my gun from the lockbox, loaded with a bullet in the chamber. I always kept a magazine in the lockbox, but never loaded into the gun. The lockbox was nowhere to be seen. Jack claimed one of the children found the gun and was playing with it. I was 100% certain that he either found the key or broke the lockbox open to get to it and load it. There was no way a 6-year-old could reach a key I could barely grab, figure out what it was for, load my gun, and chamber it. I tried my best to explain that Jack's story was nonsense and that I never kept loaded firearms in the house. But Jack, being a cop, scolded me on gun safety and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't leave. He claimed he hadn't arrested me yet because we're family. I was asked to collect my belongings and go back to my parents. Jack had won, or so he thought. The next day I apologized to Grandpa Tom and explained there was no way one of the kids could have gotten the key. He agreed with me and apologized, but thought it best if I moved out until things cooled down. He assured me I'd be welcome back home once everything settled. Our relationship was a bit fractured due to the misinformation provided by Jack. A month later, Grandpa Tom died of a heart attack at 86. I was devastated. I had just begun to rebuild the trust that had been somewhat shattered. To this day, I'm still unsure what kind of man he saw me as in those final days, thanks to Jack's interference. Immediately after Grandpa Tom's passing, Jack and Melissa began sucking up to my dad. They had sealed their payday with Grandpa Tom, and now it was time to move on to Uncle Mark. This persisted for a month or two. I wouldn't stand for it. Then came time for the reading of the will. Grandpa Tom's lawyer read out the will to me, my parents, and Sarah in our home. Jack and Emma would be briefed individually on their share of the estate, as per my grandparents' requests. Then the miracle line in the will came to light. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate that is not assigned to them, they forfeit any assets they are supposed to receive, and these will be divided equally among the remaining family members. This was basically their way of saying, if you try to claim more than you're given, you get nothing. My father was supposed to receive every piece of physical property, aside from 2 or 3 items set aside for me, from my grandparents, as he was the only remaining child. The revenge. I hatched my plan. I called Jack and told him all of Grandma's jewelry was to be donated to a charity auction. Grandma's collection of gems and metals was extensive, to say the least, so a charity event wouldn't care if a few pieces didn't make it, right? It was bait of gargantuan proportions that my greedy cousin couldn't resist. Jack took the bait and headed over to my grandparents' house as fast as he could, determined to snatch up as much as he could. A handful would be enough to send his kids to college. Regardless of what I said, the jewelry was never going to go to him anyway, so his actions were purely his own since none of it was destined to be his. Coincidentally, Dad was on his way with the lawyer to my grandparents' house to look over everything. Just a formality. According to my dad's testimony, Jack had 3 shoeboxes worth of Grandma and Grandpa's jewelry piled on the kitchen counter, ready to be loaded into his car. My dad and the lawyer stood in the kitchen, wondering why it was all there when Jack walked in from my grandparents' bedroom with a 4th and final shoebox. The jig was up, and Jack put 2 and 2 together, realizing I had set him up. Which was true, but there was no penalty against me for exploiting my cousin's greed, so he would screw himself over. It's worth noting that in the 8 years between my aunt's death and my grandpa's death, their wealth had increased several times over. Jack felt cheated and expected to receive just as much as Sarah and I, despite having already received half of his share and blowing it. Throughout this whole ordeal, Emma hadn't caused any problems and was still grieving over Grandpa Tom's death like the rest of us. Just like that, Jack lost enough money in the course of 30 minutes to make him question his sanity. All because of his greed. Melissa apparently filed for divorce a few weeks later. We haven't heard from Jack in nearly 3 years as he's all but disgraced now. You could call this a fairy tale ending, and for this particular part of the story, it somewhat is. There was a massive lawsuit involving the IRS and FBI later on, filed by an unknown family member, but that's a story for another day. Honestly, I would rather have my grandparents back than all this drama and money. If you want to hear about the other part of the story, let me know, but it's not really a revenge story. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd end up in a situation like this. My quiet suburban life turned into a nightmare when the local homeowner association decided they could do whatever they wanted, even to those of us who weren't members. It all started about 6 months ago when I moved into the Oakwood Hills neighborhood. The houses were nice, the streets were clean, and it seemed like a great place to settle down. I noticed some homes had these little plaques by their front doors with Oakwood Hills Homeowner Association member on them. No big deal, I thought. Homeowner associations aren't my thing, but to each their own. A couple weeks after moving in, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a middle-aged woman with a forced smile plastered on her face. "Hi there, I'm Linda, president of the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association. We're so excited to have a new neighbor join our community." I gave a polite nod. "Nice to meet you, I'm Mark." Linda launched into her rehearsed speech about all the amazing benefits of joining the Homeowner Association. Community events, landscaping services, increased property values, blah blah blah. When she finished, I just said, "Thanks for the info, but I'm not interested in joining right now." Her smile faltered for a second before she recovered. "Oh, well, that's too bad. Are you sure I can't change your mind? We really do so much for the neighborhood. I appreciate the offer, but I prefer to handle things on my own. Thanks anyway." Linda left, but I could tell she wasn't happy. Over the next few months, I got frequent visits from various homeowner association board members trying to convince me to join. They'd point out minor issues with my yard or house paint that the homeowner association could help with. I politely declined each time. Things escalated when they started leaving passive-aggressive notes on my door about my unkempt property lowering neighborhood values. My grass was maybe half an inch taller than theirs at most. I ignored the notes. Then came the day that changed everything. I was at work when my phone started blowing up with notifications from my home security cameras. I opened the app to see several people in uniforms marked Homeowner Association Security breaking down my front door. I immediately called the police and raced home. By the time I got there, the cops had already arrived. The scene inside my house was unreal. These homeowner association goons had ransacked the place, overturning furniture and smashing things. They claimed they were doing a wellness check because I hadn't responded to their notices, as if that gives them the right to break in. The police were skeptical of their story. "You're not actual law enforcement," one officer said. "You had no legal authority to enter this home." The homeowner association security supervisor, a guy named Brad, puffed out his chest. "We have every right. This is homeowner association property, and we can inspect it anytime we want." "Actually," I cut in, "I'm not even a member of your homeowner association. This is my private property that you just illegally entered and vandalized." Brad's face went pale. Apparently, Linda had told them I was a problem resident who needed to be taught a lesson. She conveniently failed to mention I wasn't part of their association. I pressed charges for breaking and entering, vandalism, and trespassing. The homeowner association tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but the security camera footage didn't lie. In the end, Brad and his team were arrested. Linda and the rest of the homeowner association board faced a massive lawsuit for authorizing the illegal raid. The legal battle dragged on for months. The homeowner association's lawyers tried every trick to wiggle out of responsibility. They claimed I had verbally agreed to join the homeowner association. I hadn't. They said the security team went rogue and the board knew nothing about it. Emails proved otherwise. At one point, they even tried to argue that my house was technically on homeowner association land, so they had a right to enter. The judge shut that down real quick. Finally, after mountains of evidence and testimony, the verdict came in. The homeowner association was found liable for over $500,000 in damages and legal fees. Brad and his security goons were convicted on multiple charges. Linda and 2 other board members were charged with conspiracy. The aftermath was intense. The homeowner association was forced to disband entirely. Many residents who had been intimidated into joining over the years celebrated their newfound freedom. A few die-hard homeowner association supporters tried to rally and form a new association, but most of the neighborhood wanted nothing to do with it. As for me, I used part of the settlement money to repair my home and upgrade the security system. The rest went into a fund to help my neighbors break free from oppressive homeowner associations in other communities. It's been about a year since the dust settled. Our neighborhood is doing better than ever without the homeowner association's iron fist. People are free to paint their houses fun colors, grow gardens, and generally live their lives without constant scrutiny. Linda and her cronies still glare at me when they see me around town, but I just smile and wave, knowing that their reign of terror is finally over. It wasn't easy, but standing up to their illegal and unethical behavior was worth it in the end. If there's one lesson I learned from all this, it's to never let anyone bully you on your own property, homeowner association member or not. The next one is a petty revenge story. So this was quite a few years ago, early 2000s. At this point, I had my cell number for about 4 years. Then one night, I got multiple calls from someone who only spoke Chinese. I kept telling them they had a wrong number, which I'm pretty sure they didn't understand. These calls persisted every few weeks at all times of day and night, but most frequently between midnight and 3 a.m. Eventually, after about 6 months, I received a call from a legal assistant to a lawyer named Colin W. She explained to me that there was a typo on his business cards. Instead of a 3 in his phone number, it has a 2, which was my number. She asked if I received calls just to give the person the correct number. I responded that 199% off the calls I receive are from people that only speak Chinese, and 2, can they just get new cards or write the proper number on it? She responded that they ordered a lot of cards and didn't want to order new ones. But they'll make an effort to put the correction on the card. About 4 to 5 months went by with no late night calls, so I figured the problem was solved. But I was wrong because they stared up again, this time more frequent, like every 2 to 3 days, multiple calls a day at all hours. So I called Colin W. He apologized and said that he ran a very small immigration law firm and that his legal assistant had quit and it was her that made the phone number correction on the card and he was far too busy to remember to make the correction every time he handed out his cards. He asked if I could just give the person calling the correct number. I told him that was almost impossible because 99% of his clients didn't speak English, which he replied with, "Try your best," and hung up. This really frustrated me, but what could I do? For the next few months, I tried my best to correct people, but very few understood me and would repeatedly call me after I hung up on them. Then one day I was at the mall with friends. A lady at one of those kiosks asked if I'd like to enter a contest to win a trip to Florida or Mexico. My friend was like, "Don't, it's a timeshare scam, and as soon as they get your number, they constantly call you with, 'You won a free trip that you have to pay fees for.'" That's when I had a great thought of how to get my petty revenge. I entered Colin W into the contest. In fact, there were multiple contests at the mall I entered him into, from trips to free gym memberships to gift cards. Side note, I've been receiving calls for this guy for almost a year. Besides his name and number, I looked up his law firm address and email online. Because he wouldn't take my call of me complaining, I had emailed him to get new cards and even wrote a snail mail letter to get him to fix his cards. I had a lot of downtime at work, so I started to enter him into contests online, usually 5 to 15 in a day. I did this 5 days a week when I was at work, and any time I was out shopping for about 8 months. I would have continued longer, but at about the 8 months mark, I stopped getting calls for Colin W. Around a week after that, I looked him up online, and he had changed his cell phone number. The next one is a malicious compliance story, so every morning I walk my dog at the off-lead dog park. As it's a small town, all the dog walkers have become friendly. I, mid-40s, made friends with June, 75-80. June told me this lovely MC story from about 25 years or more ago. June was working as a school teacher and was retraining as a social worker. She left teaching for 2 years working as a social worker when her previous school asked her and run a class for at-risk children. The deal was she would teach children aged 12 to 18, grade 7 to 12, who come from backgrounds of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. The job was causal, so she didn't get paid for holidays, sick leave, etc. She was supposed to teach 6 kids with an aide, but ending up with 20 kids and no teacher's aide. As you can imagine, their behavior was terrible. She believed she could help, and she said she did make some real differences. The work was really stressful, but she was passionate about it. After 3 years and multiple promises of making her a permanent staff member, getting an aide plus smaller classes, June was burnt out. She demanded help from the principal, who refused and told her since she has complained, it's for the last time, and sacked her. He told her she is causal and she go complain to everyone and everywhere, but as a casual worker you have little rights. So June did complain to everyone, school inspector, the union, Department of Education, it was a state school, and even her local member of parliament who told her she has had a tough deal, but this is the life of a casual worker. She finally complained to the state authority that deals with safe work practices. They were interested as the school has breached state policy on class sizes for special needs kids, teacher aides, providing a safe environment, etc. They ordered the Department of Education to pay her workers' compensation while they sorted it out. So now June was paid each fortnight, including leave and all benefits. 52 weeks a year instead of 40. The fallout was big after the investigation. Lots of people sacked or moved on. What this did was leave June without a boss. The Safe Work Practice Department closes the case as they believe it was now a depth of education matter to pay June out. Everyone has forgotten about June and she got lost in government paperwork. They still paid her and she kept quiet. It took 10 years before they found her in an employee audit. Then they paid her out. June was ready to retire about then, so it worked out beautifully. The next one is an entitled People's Story. I have a very annoying colleague, let's call her Mel. I and the rest of the office can share 1,000 stories about her behavior. She was playing a mobile game with sound on. One other girl, Val, told her to put it on silent. The first thing she did was scold Val for the times she spoke to someone and Mel got disturbed. Val speaks to one other colleague in her mother tongue. They don't do it when we are in a group, but when they are discussing something amongst each other, they prefer their native language. This bothers Mel too much because she comes to the office only to eavesdrop on the rest of us. She's severely lagging behind in all her work. The next thing she did was tell everyone in the department, whoever was patient enough to listen, that Val has a problem with Mel's message notifications. completely skipping the game bit. Then she caught me while I was having tea. Surprisingly, or not, she catches me on very specific days when she has something to tell me. This hasn't happened in a while, and I had a lot of work that day, so my guard was lower. Mel told me that Val was saying I expose in the office and my attire is inappropriate. Then she said that everyone in the department agrees. Most of the time I ignore whatever comes out of Mel's mouth, but due to too much stress I immediately reported Val to our boss. For the record, I work at a university and mostly just wear crop tops and jeans, or sometimes sundresses, which is very common in our department. The only difference is that I'm slightly curvy and have a full head of frizzy curly hair, think Hagrid. But no one in the department has ever made a comment, including my female boss. Boss was super supportive and told me she'll take action against Val, but suggested that I speak to her first. I was not looking forward to that because Val is much junior than me and has always kept her distance. I actually believed what Mel said. Even though I knew Mel must have twisted something, I definitely believed that Val must have made at least a small comment about my attire. So I didn't say anything and went home for an extended weekend. When I came back, I had a clearer head and time on my hand. I finally called Val near my desk, in full view of Mel. Val told me that she asked Mel to turn her phone on silent, and since then she's on a hate mission against her, spreading all kinds of lies about her. Then we both watched Mel practically run out of the office, not even stopping to put on her bag properly. I updated the boss and heard from my colleagues that Mel came to the office super early the next morning to do damage control with the boss. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.